All right, well, on behalf of the Jasper Chamber, I'd like to welcome you here this morning. I did want to mention that we've been doing this event for many, many years. And as some of you who've been coming to these for years know, that we used to have coffee and breakfast at Jerry's restaurant, and we would be in the bistro here at the university, and we were in the other auditorium, and now we're in this nice location. So we've had some changes through the years, is what I'm trying to say. So we have another change for today. So instead of passing the microphone around with people asking questions, we're going to ask that you write your question down on the piece of paper that's at the end of the row, and then I will read those questions to the legislators. So we thought we would try a different format for today. So eagerly pass those papers down. If you need more, raise your hand. I'm happy to. We have a whole box full of paper. We'll never run out of that. So if you have questions, make sure you do write them down, and then when I ask for those, then you can just turn those into me, and I'll ask as many of the questions as we can get around to doing. So now I would like to thank our legislators for being here this morning. We have State Representative Shane Lindauer is here, and two of our state senators, Erin Houchin and Messmer. So let's thank them for being here this morning. All right, and as we normally do, the one change we're not going to make is we're going to just ask them to start talking about some things that they have going on at the State House, and maybe some bills they're sponsoring or some legislation that they're following. And so I think Shane will just start with you, and then we'll just go down the table.
Sounds good. Okay, so like Nancy said, my name is Shane Lindauer. I'm a representative for District 63, which is portions, it's northern Du Bois and Pike, roughly. Southern Davies and Martin. So that's roughly the area that I represent. This is my second session, so my first budget session. I was caucused in, for those of you who don't know, to replace Mike Braun, now Senator Braun. So it's been a fun ride. A lot's happened for me in the last year or so, and it's been, I've said several times, I'll continue to say it's an honor to be part of the process and to be before you here today. And just quickly also thank you all for being here. One thing that I feel passionately about is our government was set up. It works best when we have an informed populace, and I think that we miss that sometimes these days. So the fact that you are all here on a Saturday morning, I just thank you all for being here and being part of the process. I know there's people out here who may not agree with everything I say or everything the senators say, but I respect that you're here. And one thing I tell everybody, though I may not agree, I'll always give you a hearing, and we can hear each other out. So that's where I'm at. As far as some legislation, I had my first bill go through. So again, second session, my first bill passed the House. Now it's over to the Senate, which I'm sure it's a wonderful, beautiful piece of legislation that they're going to send right on through. So it was an air ambulance bill, or it really dealt with ambulance subscriptions, which to me, it was a new one to me. It's House Bill 1094. I didn't know that these things even existed until a constituent out of Martin County brought this up. And really what it's doing is the idea is to remove some red tape and some restrictions that Indiana had placed on the consumer. So it was a consumer, a private individual, to contract with a private company, essentially. And we were, as a state, only allowing a one-year contract on that, where the ambulance subscription service had 1, 3, 5, and 10 years as a possibility. So the whole goal is to strike out that one-year provision, and I was trying to make it commensurate with what the ambulance service offered. There was an amendment on it, which I didn't think was a bad idea, which just provided a little bit of consumer protections, because still the local municipalities still have a say in this. So a local county or city still contracts with this private ambulance service. So the fear was, if you had a new administration come in that didn't want to contract with this ambulance service, yet the consumer had a 10-year contract, that kind of left them hanging out to dry. So there was an amendment offered, and I thought it was probably a good idea to go with a 5-year max. So some consumer protections in there. So like I said, that was for anybody who doesn't have ambulance service, it's probably maybe not so exciting, but it was again, it was important enough for this constituent to call me, and so I wanted to make sure we could maybe provide that opportunity. I've got another one hopefully going to be heard this week. it's House Bill 1305. I'm taking on big oil. Not really. It's really just the assessors brought that to me out of Pike County. The assessor, Mike Goodpastor, said that 99% of the gas and oil well producers, they turn a property tax assessment in specific to gas and oil well producers on May the 15th, just like everybody has to do individually. But there's no teeth in that. So if these guys are late, there's no penalty essentially. And he said, just so there's no misconception here, 99%, the vast majority of these guys are getting their stuff in on time. But there's one or two small companies, I guess, that don't take that seriously, and therefore they're not turning their paperwork in. So it puts them behind, the assessors behind, the local government units behind with the DLGF. It's also, my concern was it's a waste of taxpayer money, because then DLGF, or the local governments, local units have to track these individuals down. And so that was my concern in it, that we just make folks turn in what they're supposed to be turning in. So we're making it, again, commensurate with what everybody else has to turn in as individuals, the personal property tax assessments that have to be in on May the 15th. Same penalty, just giving it a little teeth. So hopefully we'll get movement on that. I had a income tax deduction. I talked about this last time for military. It was actually active duty military and veterans. It was pretty aggressive. It had a large fiscal. I don't think it's going to get any movement, but we've also got, that was House Bill, it was 1095. We've got House Bill 1010, which I think is going to get some movement. It passed out of Ways and Means. I believe it was this week, late this week. Which provides some tax deduction for veterans. So which I think is important to attract, military veterans to our state. Obviously, a workforce that I think we would all benefit from having in our state. So that's something that I think we'll get some movement on. The other one that I think that that's on here that I'm pretty excited about is House Bill 1064, which I'm co-author on. It's really an incentive package for public servants. It allows it's actually working with Ivy Tech. Ivy Tech is going to provide some, basically a scholarship program. It's going to start in 2021, July of 21. And then there's going to be $1 million available through Ivy Tech for certification programs or an associate's degree program. So again, I talked about this last time a little bit, that in particular, local volunteer fire services are having trouble getting members, getting bodies, getting people to help. So we're just looking at ways to maybe incentivize people to volunteer, but it's not going to be exclusive to volunteer fire services. It'll be public servants is how the language is written currently. So that passed out of committee. Should be up for, I think, second reading probably in the near future here. So Representative Bartels, who couldn't be here, I felt compelled to mention about him. So we all, this is not a full-time job for us. We've all got, full-time jobs, so to speak. And so Representative Bartels is at a conference for a boat show this week. For those of you who don't know, he's part owner of Patoka Lake Marina and the winery, which is, if you've ever been roommates or friends with somebody who runs a winery, it's incredibly annoying because he's much more popular than I am when we go places. So in any case, he's at a conference today. Would have loved to have been here, but can't be here. And he's got some stuff working as well on the public service, the volunteer fire service things that he's trying to get moving as well. So I just wanted to mention that to you. So let the senator speak, and I'd be happy to answer any questions when we're done. So again, thank you all for being here.
You ready for me? I'm Senator Erin Houchin. I'm from Salem. I represent Senate District 47. That's all of Washington, Orange, Harrison, Crawford, Perry, and the eastern half of Du Bois County. I have the great pleasure of sharing Du Bois County and my Senate District with the great Senator Mark Messmer from Jasper. And Mark and I came into the Senate at the same time. He has more legislative experience as a former House member, but it's been certainly a pleasure to serve with Senator Messmer. I have a number of bills this legislative session that I'd like to talk about, and I'll kind of just go through them. There's a lot. I have 22 bills. I'll try to cut this list down to just a few of the bills that are moving through the process. Senate Bill 1 is a Department of Child Services reform bill. We want to ensure that the best interests of vulnerable children are being addressed in the midst of the increasing child welfare caseloads, providing better in-home placement decisions. So one of the issues that we've seen, and I'm a former case manager for the Department of Child Services, case managers really need more assistance when children first enter the system. We need to make sure that they're placing an emphasis on finding a suitable family member or relative who can care for these children and hope that we don't have to go to foster care. There is a concept called finding family at first contact, and that is to require the department to make extraordinary efforts to find a family member when a child first comes into the system. So I'm going to require the department to establish a hotline for family case managers to contact so that a family case manager who gets a child in the system and has the unfortunate circumstance of a removal has some assistance in trying to locate a family member from the get-go. What we have found is that children will often go straight into foster care, and then they'll spend 6 months or 12 months or 24 months looking for family members. A child is in the system then for 24 months, and they find a family member, and then that child has another adverse event and removed from a 2-year family life that was the only family situation that had been stable for them, and it's just not been good for kids and families in Indiana. So this Finding Family at First Contact will be part of Senate Bill 1. We also have some protections in Senate Bill 1. We passed the Foster Parents Bill of Rights last session, and Senate Bill 1 goes a step further than the Foster Parents Bill of Rights by giving some foster parents some more say in the process. They're a very, very important part of DCS cases, and right now their voices are not being heard in the courtroom. We're requiring that the department include a report from the foster parents in their periodic case reviews. We are requiring that if a child goes into foster care and back into the home and then comes back into foster care, that previous foster care placement will be given priority so that we're not having additional placements for children in the system. And in addition to that, we have added a provision where a foster parent can file a termination of parental rights if a child has been in the system more than 15 out of 22 months consecutively. And what we found in our caseload weights is that there were approximately 25,000 kids in the system. 5,000 of them were eligible for termination of parental rights. Many of them had been languishing in the system for greater than 2 and 3 years, waiting on paperwork to be filed by the department or the attorneys of the department, and they were not granted permanency only because the system wasn't working for them. So by allowing foster parents the ability to advocate on behalf of the children in their care, this will allow them to be able to file a termination or to notify the court. If they can't afford an attorney, they'll be able to notify the court that the time has expired, that the children are eligible for termination, and that the department has not yet filed. So again, just further protections and for foster parents, and primarily looking for encouraging decisions that are in the best interest of the children in the system. Senate Bill 141 is a regulation on office-based opioid treatment providers. This just passed the Senate Thursday. Office-based opioid treatment providers, they are Suboxone clinics. Methadone clinics in the state of Indiana are statutorily limited. We cannot have more than 27 methadone clinics in Indiana, and if we want to go over that cap, then the state has to pass a law. They are highly regulated by the state and federal government. When Medicaid started paying for Suboxone as a treatment program in 2014, Indiana Medicaid spent $7.5 million that year on Suboxone products. At the time, there were relatively few Suboxone clinics. When I started digging into this issue, there were 400 Suboxone clinics. There are now 650 Suboxone clinics, and they are not regulated by the state or federal government. So we cannot tell if the treatment that they're getting is quality treatment. These are very vulnerable Hoosiers who are seeking out treatment and maybe not getting the quality that they deserve, and certainly we can't guarantee that Medicaid dollars are being spent responsibly. So by this time last year, Indiana Medicaid had spent $22.5 million, and in 2018 they spent $26 million on, I think, no, it's actually higher than that, but on Suboxone alone, not including what they're spending on methadone. So it's really an important piece of legislation to ensure that there's proper oversight and proper care to vulnerable Hoosiers who are seeking treatment. Senate Bill 279 is a waiver to adult court for attempted murder. We saw the Noblesville school shooting. That was a 13-year-old who attempted to commit mass murder. He ended up shooting a student and a teacher. Through the valiant efforts of the teacher, he did not succeed in murdering his mass murder plot, but he did permanently injure two individuals. The current statute allows for a waiver of juveniles who are 12 and 13 only if they commit murder, not if they try to commit murder and just by the grace of God don't succeed. This is not an automatic waiver, but it does allow a judge to waive a juvenile to adult court if they feel that is proper. And in this case, in that particular case, this juvenile who attempted to commit mass murder will be out at the age of 18 shortly thereafter, and could be released prior to that. So that is an important bill to make sure that we are properly protecting citizens, and in particular, the penalty, in my mind, should not be kept in juvenile court if a court can find that it's in the best interest of the community and the child and others to serve that in adult court. I have a bill to increase the maximum allowable deduction for over 65 property taxes. If you're over 65 and you are claiming the property tax deduction, that has not been increased since 2010. And so you may have found yourself with a tax bill because you've now gone over the cap. And so we're trying to address that cliff that you hit when your property is suddenly assessed over the value that was set in 2010, and that bill is trying to address that. School administrator contracts. A few years ago, I passed a bill that would prohibit superintendent contracts from exceeding 3 years on the initial contract and 5 years on a subsequent contract, and a superintendent contract buyout cannot exceed more than 1 year's salary or $250,000, whichever is the lesser amount. And so that is an attempt to keep dollars in the classroom and avoid it going to golden parachutes for outgoing superintendents. What we did not do in that legislation, and it did not occur to me that assistant superintendents and principals and assistant principals could get exorbitant buyouts to that degree. But after the legislation passed, we were contacted by some school corporations that said, can you make this apply to others that would potentially get exorbitant buyouts? So I have a bill to address that issue that will apply the contract buyout limitations to assistant superintendents, principals, and assistant principals. Right now we're under a circumstance where an assistant superintendent could potentially get a larger buyout than the superintendent because of the way that was not done at the time. So we are fixing that this legislative session. Senate Bill 388 increases, it adjusts the salary for state police officers based on the Consumer Price Index. We did do a state police increase in their pay in the last budget cycle. We did not tie it to the CPI, so we're going to get ourselves into the same situation that we were in 2 years ago in the budget cycle when state police hadn't seen a pay raise in 8 years, and they got farther and farther behind. They were losing officers to local jurisdictions, and so this will tie that to the CPI so that they can be competitive and properly taken care of. The alternative diploma is a bill that I'm working on. Current law only allows 1% of students to receive an alternative diploma, and this is particularly for special education students who could do greater than getting a certificate of completion, but may not be able to achieve a general diploma. It does give them an avenue to get a diploma. Unfortunately, our state average of students that could qualify for the alternative diploma is around 1.3%. So with the 1% cap, we're missing out on and letting about 0.3% of our special education students fall through the crack by not allowing them to access this diploma. So it creates a waiver process to allow schools to, under limited circumstances, when the case conference determines that it's appropriate, to allow a child to go, or the school corporation to go over the cap and to get the alternative diploma. A couple of others that I will mention. The ABLE credit, we created the ABLE accounts to allow individuals to make limited contributions to an account to benefit an individual with a disability or a child with a disability without penalty for their other benefits. But when we created ABLE accounts, we did not do a tax credit. So 529 accounts are available for students, parents to contribute to 529 accounts to fund future educational options to pay for college, and they do get a tax credit. The ABLE accounts, which are designed to allow a parent to save for the future care of a disabled child, they get the benefit of not having penalty for that savings, but right now they do not have a tax credit. So we're trying to create parity with that issue in the 529 accounts by creating a tax credit for the ABLE accounts. And then the last bill I'll mention is establishing the Office of the State Medical Examiner. The state of Kentucky, the state of Michigan, several of our surrounding states have the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And in Indiana, we don't have that system. So when a prosecutor needs a criminal forensic pathologist to conduct an autopsy for a criminal investigation, in many cases around the state, they're having to send those autopsies to other states to be done. And so in southern Indiana, they're sending them to Louisville, Kentucky. In northern Indiana, they're sending them to Michigan because that structure is just not available in Indiana. Kentucky recently, because they're having so many of their own autopsies that they cannot keep up, quit accepting Indiana autopsies, which has put us in a very bad position. Not to mention the fact that state and local dollars were going out of state for something that we can do ourselves. So this will create the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner under the Indiana State Police. We will have a northern, central, and southern Indiana medical examiner's office where we will hire forensic pathologists to be able to conduct these autopsies for criminal investigations. That's all I will touch on now, and I'll let Mark take the mic.
Thank you, Erin. And Erin and I do work together on a lot of bills, and she's been a solid member of the Senate since coming in 2014. So I really appreciate working with her. I represent Senate District 48, and in Du Bois County, my districts basically cover the Greater Jasper School District and Southwest Du Bois. Hers covers Southeast and Northeast Du Bois. I mean, most district lines are broken by school corporation boundaries, whether it's on a House district or Senate, just to keep communities of interest connected. So, and then I've got all of Pike County, all of Spencer County. I've got the east half of Warwick County from about the Toyota plant in Gibson County, going north all the way through to, past Vincennes in Knox County. So, it's a big area. Fortunately, I live in about the middle of it. So I've got about an hour to the west, an hour to the south to cover the two boundaries. In the Senate, we had 639 bills filed this year. And I think the House was in the 700s, 750, okay. And you might say, well, gosh, why, how can there be that many bills filed? And I'll give some examples of, most of these are not brand new concepts. Almost everything we've done so far is going into an existing set of law, finding something that's not working, something that needs change because technology has changed or something in society has happened, like the drug clinics. Things happening like, and almost everything we do is going back into an existing statute and modifying it to something that's happening in society today. We've passed about 25 bills out of the Senate so far. 24 of those were bipartisan. Most of them were unanimous. One that we didn't have bipartisan support on it still had Republicans voting against it. I think about half the votes against were Republican, half were Democrat. So it was bipartisan opposition, just not bipartisan support. In the Senate, I chair the Environmental Committee, and I'm on the Public Policy Committee and Tax and Fiscal Committees. I've got 12 bills that I filed. 2 of them, when I worked on them in November, December, I told the guys who were asking for them, I'll get them ready, but somebody else is going to have to take them during session because, I've got more than I'm going to be able to get done with the ones that I wanted to do. So those will either get handed off to somebody else or just die. Of the 10 that I've got left, 8 have hearings scheduled, 5 next week, so next week I'll be busy. And then 2 the following week, and then 1 the week after that. And the 2 that I haven't got hearings scheduled on yet, one of them is chronic pain management that I'm trying to work on with the chiropractors to try to get alternative treatments to patients, before they are prescribed, opioids, to try to, not just chiropractic, but there's other alternative, pain management processes. The insurance companies really don't like it. The medical doctors really don't like it. So, I'm working multiple times a week trying to sit down with, with the doctors, sit down with the chiropractors, sit down with the other folks involved in it and try to hammer out, differences and what they'd like to see changed in the language. It might be something we have to, if we don't get it far enough along this year, we'll just bring it back next year and work again. But it does need to be part of the pain management process of patients without immediately going to drugs. And so we'll keep working on that. But one of the bills that I've got hearing for next week, it's called Unlawful Indemnity Agreements. And you'd think, what in the heck is that? Well, in the construction business, historically, and for forever, if you were a general contractor and you had subcontractors on your project, and sometimes we're the general, sometimes we're the sub, each contractor was responsible for the safety of his people, and they, each, the general and the sub were responsible for maintaining safe conditions on the job site. There was a court ruling about 3 years ago, that said the general contractor is responsible for everybody's safety, and the subcontractors are responsible for no safety. And that really kind of turned liability, on its head. And so this bill will reset the clock. And I would say a good chunk of we had bills just this week where we go back and because of a court ruling, a judge interprets something that wasn't clear in code. As we were working on one of these bills this week, I leaned over to Rod and said, how many times do we have to go back and correct judicial, interpretations of what we thought was clear in law? Obviously, it wasn't. So that's an example of why we do what we do. I have never had a session where we've not gone back into something in law and had to redefine or reset, what we clearly meant because of a judicial ruling somewhere in Indiana. And sometimes it goes to the appeals court, sometimes it's even a Supreme Court ruling, and we're like, that was never the intention of what that law was meant to do, so we go back and make adjustments, refine definitions. So that'll be one of the bills I've got next week. Another one next week is clarifying that people that are in the direct sales business, whether you're Amway, Mary Kay, like my wife does, and I even had the Hoosier Press Association ask people who are contracted to deliver newspapers, that they are not considered employees when it comes to unemployment or workman's comp. There's not been a judicial ruling on that yet in Indiana. In fact, most of them have confirmed, the subcontractor status or the independent contractor status, but our definitions in code are pretty weak. And so we're just trying to, that is more proactive than reactive. But just clarifying and adding definitions of what is ineligible for workman's comp and unemployment if you are a direct salesperson or you're an independent contractor, just clearing up definitions. One that I'm working on with the Indiana Office of Defense Development is we've got a set of statutes in our code called the Base Realignment Commission or Base Oversight Realignment Commission, and I've been on it every year I've been there. It's been in statute for 15 years. But the committee has never met. So that's just, but it has on it such a ungodly amount of people, that if they would ever decide to meet, and they were basically set up in case there was another base realignment commission to be doing what we could within our communities to support the bases, but I mean, it's never even convened one time, and it's such there'd be probably 100 people on this committee if it ever met. There's legislators from every district that has a base in it. There's multiple local people on it. It's just unmanageable. So the lady who's in charge of our Indiana Office of Defense Development said that group really needs to be a proactive group, looking at how do we take our existing places in Annapolis and Crane and northwest Indiana, where there's a huge Humvee production facility that is probably one of the biggest defense contractors in the state. You got Rolls-Royce jet engine plant that does jet engines for military aircraft. You've got, you've got the foods company down just off Interstate 64, 41, Commerqual Foods, a huge producer of ready to eat meals, whatever, for MREs for the military. We've got billions of dollars of contracts going on, but there's nothing in place, and there could be, where these people would work together to maximize Indiana's ability to actually get defense contracts to people who are in the defense contracting business. Right now, we generate Indiana receives about 1% of the military spending in between our defense bases and our defense contractors. And she said if we could raise that to 2%, which is completely achievable if we had the right strategy and the right, she's been in the military, for 20 years. She works out of the Air National Guard, I believe, in Texas, flies home every weekend or most weekends, is in Annapolis during the week, and she's a sharp lady, and she gets it. And so we're going to restructure that committee and call it the Indiana Defense Task Force Committee. It'll consist of about 7 people, not 100, and we'll have some, the lieutenant governor. There'll be some, some governmental folks appointed to it. There'll be some legislative people that are non-voting, and all these committees, the legislators that are on them, are always non-voting, so we don't get constitutional conflict of interest of us trying to tell an executive, agency, how to do their job. But they'll be more proactive in how to maximize our defense contracting efficiency in this state. So pretty excited about that. I've got 2 broadband bills that I'm working on, and Senator Houchin is co-authoring on those. One would be last year, she was the sponsor, I was one of the co-sponsors on House and Road Act 1065, and we sat together and we worked with people in the broadband industry and the telephone industry and the wireless, worked with all of these constituency groups to set up some criteria, so as we go out and if the state, hopefully this session, has money budgeted to offer broadband grants for rural unserved areas. It was a pretty extensive process of setting up checklists so we don't end up subsidizing broadband development in places that already have it, because then you're going to set up competition with people that are already providing service in an area with subsidized service in an area, and that would be very contradictory. So that was a painfully difficult process to get everybody together, and at the end of the session we did, and the governor signed it. So you think, okay, he likes it. And so in the fall, they decided to raise the toll rates on the toll road in northern Indiana, and he has complete authority to do that. It's within the contract with the toll road company. It's within the statutory authority to do it. But he said, I want a good chunk of that to go to expedite construction of I-69. Great. I want $100 million of that to go to broadband grants. Sounds great. And then I want more to go to trails projects. Sounds great. But he didn't want to use, on the broadband grants, he didn't want to use the mechanism we worked on last session to distribute it. He said, well, that's too restrictive. I'm just going to have NDOT do it, not Okra, and we'll just do it the way we want to do it.
That was my reaction.
And we're all like, wow, okay. So, that kind of we might as well not have a budget, if that's, but, so I got a bill that requires, it takes it from Okra, being the deliverer of processor of broadband grants, and it says any state agency. So we don't end up saying Okra and NDOT this year is going to follow these rules, and next year he says I'm going to have the Indiana Finance Authority do it. I mean, I don't want to play whack-a-mole with state agencies, and that could happen. I don't think they like it, but it's got a hearing scheduled. I know they don't like it. And really, hand in hand with that, these broadband providers that are trying to get rural broadband to unserved areas that are already the lowest density per, customer per mile of any, it's the same way with telephone. It's why we've got, rural electric cooperatives. We've got, telephone, electric, it's all, to get to the rural unserved people, it's expensive because the density of the customer is very low. Well, they're taking these broadband companies, and because there's, because it's unclear in the code, they say, well, because we're not prohibited from charging broadband companies, right-of-way access fees, we will. And my meeting with NDOT last week, I said, okay, so you guys want to be in the broadband granting game. You want to be in this process. So you're going to award matching grants for all of these rural unserved areas in one hand. And then in the other hand, you're going to charge right-of-way access fees to these same companies. So you're going to award it in this hand and take it in the other hand. I said, is there anything, stupider than that? And they said, well, we really never thought of that. So they should have. Yeah, we mentioned it. Yeah. And all of this resistance by them for not allowing them to charge broadband providers, and it was clearly defined that it's broadband service providers. They said, well, we've got this contract we're trying to negotiate with Facebook, because Facebook has a data center in Iowa and another one in Virginia, and they want to come through Indiana, and we want to be able to charge them, for running their fiber through I-74's right away, and they're willing to pay. Well, great, go ahead and do it, because they're not an internet service provider. They wouldn't meet the definition. And if you can secure a contract for them to run through your interstate right away, and you want to do it, go ahead, because this bill wouldn't impact that at all, because they don't provide broadband to consumers in our state, and so you'd be free to do that. Well, so I'm having ongoing discussions with them on that. I've got a text from Chris Kiefer yesterday. I didn't get to call him back, that they've come up with some decisions on, broadband right-of-way access and the granting. So, but the governor did agree with me finally when session started. Okay, we will require NDOT to follow all of your rules that you passed in 1065. I thought, well, great. Then you probably should have no reason in supporting my bill. If you've agreed to do it, let's put it in writing. Sign it. So we'll work on those. Those will be interesting. Last year, there was some resistance from the House to hear those provisions of the right-of-way access, because the Facebook contract was out there hanging, and the House chairman wasn't real interested in hearing it. I haven't talked to Representative Solida yet, but from what the broadband providers that have talked to him think he's willing to listen and give it some consideration, and if nothing else, put pressure on NDOT, if they don't want to put it in writing in a bill, put it in writing in some other way. I mean, let's get it in writing. A bill that I'm working on that really spawned out of a constituent here in Jasper. And so I went to the Indiana Prosecutors Association and worked with them over the summer on how to address. A constituent had a child that was being groomed by a sexual predator, and there's nothing. And she went to the prosecutor. She saw the text messages. There had not actually been, physical contact yet. There had not been, a lewd photo sent yet. I mean, nothing that would rise to the criminal provisions that they would need to intervene. And then so they said, well, there's really nothing we can do. I find that unsatisfactory answer, that we're going to just allow people to groom a child. You know what's happening. and you can't stop the process or intervene in any way. So I worked with the prosecutors, and they had a list of about 10 other things, similar things. Victims' bill, we call it the Victims' Bill of Rights for criminal acts, to where the victim has more, protection, through the process. And my constituent was one of those. They had a handful of other ones, and so that bill is going to get a hearing in Senator Young's committee next week. But in our situation, a judge would be required to grant, a protective order to that parent, for that, against that other adult, just from the grooming practices. At least they'd have some means to legally stop what's going on before it ends up with a child being raped or a child being abused. Why require it to get to that level before we take some action? So. Pleased with that one. So the constituents coming to town next week to testify, and the Prosecutors Association is going to be supporting that one 100%. So there was a couple other things out of that bill that Senator Young picked and filed his own bill from. So we'll see which pieces of my bill he moves through and which ones he pulls out. Whatever, as long as my constituents' issue moves, I'm happy. And I think all of those provisions will move. Well, there's a couple of them that they said we're adding a couple of these in there just to kick the hornet's nest, and they might come out, but not the issue that's dealing with the protective order, in my constituent's case. I've got a pretty comprehensive casino update. We've got riverboats and Great Lake boats that were codified 25 years ago. And in that time, across the country, the business model of riverboats has really, proven not to be. 25 years ago, that's how every state did it. And at the time we set them up, the boats had to be on the water, to gamble. Well, a few years later, they found out along the Ohio River, most places they have to get into Kentucky waterway to turn around. And so Kentucky said, if you're going to continue to do that, we want a piece of that. So they decided to let them stay anchored, so none of the boats have to sail. And then 2-3 years ago, we decided to let them move on ground within their footprint. And we still have some because of what's happened in Cincinnati, what's happened in Michigan, what's happened in Illinois, and even Kentucky doesn't have casinos, but they have digital horse racing that happens at the push of a button. So they have casinos. They just don't call them casinos. They call them digital horse racing. And so it's a comprehensive look. And Terre Haute had, 2 years ago came to ask about, as part of a convention center redevelopment of their downtown Terre Haute area, they wanted the ability to apply for a casino license. One of the boats in Gary, it's actually 2 boats that are docked that operate as one casino. They used to, when they had to sail, one would take off and they would do the gambling. The other one would stay anchored, and they'd reload that one, and one came in, the other one would take off. So they would have nonstop casino availability. But since they didn't have to sail anymore, now they just operate as one casino, and that license would be logical to allow it to be moved. And we're trying to work through all of the existing gaming operators, to how to handle moving that license to Terre Haute without, we don't want to set it up to where only that person, that license holder benefits. So there's a lot of negotiation going on how to get that done to where Terre Haute and the state of Indiana get a competitively bid situation on that casino location. When we did that for French Lick, we had $150 million minimum investment, that casino companies had to bid on, and it was bid competitively. And instead of a $150 million proposal, we had a $380 million proposal. So when you force those companies to compete against each other, the community gets a better package, and the state gets a better investment. And so that one is scheduled, I think, for February 13th, and continuing to work on bits and pieces of that. They are a very proprietary bunch of people, though. They're hard to negotiate with. Working with a physical therapist to update their practice scope. I'd got that done for the chiropractors last year. It had been about 30 years since they updated Their practice scope for the chiropractors has been about the same amount of time for the physical therapist. And I've got that down to where the State Medical Association is on board with everything they want to do. They've got all the definitional disagreements worked out, meeting with the PTs and the chiropractors on Monday. Hope to meet with some final tweaking with the occupational therapists later in the week to allow them to update their scope of practice to really match what's happening in physical therapy education today and practice today. So should be able to get that one scheduled around the second week of February as well. The health committee chairman has said it will get a hearing. Just get it as close as you can. At least having the MDs and the osteopaths, agreement to the major concerns they had. And Monday, I think we should be able to knock out any concerns the chiropractors have. We'll be able to get the bill amended and ready for a hearing. So, and just an update in my meeting that I had with NDOT on the broadband issues last week. I asked them explain to me what they're doing, at the rest stops, and specifically we got one here at Nancy Hanks rest stop. What are you doing and why? Because to go out and just post some signs closing, whatever 30 or 60, whatever it is, I said that it doesn't make any sense. Explain to me what you're doing. And they said, well, the process of what NDOT has decided to do was where the interstates, like Interstate 64 in Posey County, and in, I don't know if it's Clark or Floyd County, where the entry is into the state, they're going to build large sites. They own enough property around them to make them, 5 to 10 acre sites where they'll have parking for hundreds of trucks, improve the rest stops to make them, handicap accessible and all of the provisions, because most of them are, 40 plus years old. Going to spend $20 to $30 million at each of those locations to get them to be significant improvements. And then in the process go to the ones in the interior of the state, and there would be about 30 of them total, that, anything that's within the borders of the state. And he said, Nancy Hanks is in pretty good shape, but there's a lot of them that are just decrepit and an embarrassment because they haven't been maintained and improved very well. And close all the ones in the interior, make really nice ones around the perimeter, so trucks have a place to stop. And I said, well, that sounds great, but he said, what do we need to do? I said, well, probably two things would make sense to me. Number one, rather than just put a sign up, go to Dale and go to, have a town hall meeting and explain to people what you're doing and why. And most people would say, well, that probably makes long-term sense. I said, and then the second thing, don't close the facilities you've got until you've got the other ones open. And then, we never thought of that.
Oh, that same thing yesterday.
So Chris Kiefer said, we could probably do that. So I think there's already been announcement or change to the posting. They're not going to keep it open indefinitely, but until they get the other one open, why would you close the one you have?
Exactly what I mean.
It's just, so that's an update on that. I hope they still follow through and schedule their town hall meeting to explain to people what they're doing. I said, if you communicate with people, most people are not unreasonable. If they know what you're doing and they know what your long-term plan is, they'll probably understand it and think it's okay. So.
All right. Does anyone have questions that they've written down on the papers? Anybody down here? Okay. All right, and these are in no order. I'm just going to read the best I can based on the handwriting. And then I'll hand this to you so you can read it also. Okay, the first one says, the Natural Resource Commission recently adopted the Indiana terrestrial plant rule banning I think it's the sale of 44 highly invasive plants. Unfortunately, these plants have already escaped and are seriously degrading the environment. What should the state's role be in addressing this threat, and does it have a role in your opinion? I'll just let you kind of reread that if you want to. If anyone like to comment on it?
Well, I mean, I would imagine, the DNR, probably has, authority within statute to go out and try. I mean, they do tackle or try to deal with invasive species. Here again, that's another issue that I don't think there's ever been a session, come along where invasive species, with plants or carp or, whatever the invasive species, mussels in the Great Lakes, there's been something to deal with how to address, going after invasive species. So, I mean, whatever the state agencies, need, if they don't have proper authority to, to try to, continue to tackle that. I mean, I think their point, with the current rule that they drafted was to try to minimize or stop new, invasive species from, that are a lot of times landscaping, decorative products that end up, creating problems out in the environment. But, if we need to help and enable them, we can. There's probably enough statutory authority to deal with that. But, I think this rule was to try to be more proactive rather than just be reactive, going forward.
Yeah, so I've had a handful of conversations with people that are involved in this field, of invasive species and controlling invasive species. And I think the questioning or the conversation usually goes to, should the state of Indiana outlaw the sale of some of these things, some of these invasive species. And, just personally, my first reaction to that is always, you hate creating new, rules and regulations for people to follow. But so much of what we do in this position, there's a constant tension, between, protecting, people, or in this case, the environment, and therefore people, and still allowing, the personal freedom that we all want, right? I think, if you ask most people in this room, the government at times meddles too much in our personal lives, and I certainly recognize that and have felt that many times in my life, both before this life and the role I am in now. So I do think that the state, to address, I guess the question directly, the state's role, that's one I'm still grappling with, quite honestly. I do think the state has a role in it, as Senator Messmer just alluded to. As much as it kind of cuts against my natural grain, I'm personally kind of moving toward the point where, we may need to look at, outlawing some of these things. I'm still, having conversations with people and getting information and because how do you control them? The conversation's been made, once these invasive species are out, once they're in the environment, you can't get enough people to manage them, to maintain them. They're out, and they're obviously, most of you know, I'm sure, they're drowning out the things that naturally grow here in Indiana. So it becomes quite a problem, and certainly no easy answer on it, but something we're looking at, something I think the state, we have to address, at least one way or another at the state level. So.
Just kind of a follow-up on that, Erin, before you talk. Can NDOT do more to control the invasive species on the highway, more problems on the interstate? So I don't know if NDOT's planting invasive species along the interstate or if they're just overtaking some of those areas.
I just would add to their comments that I think the government does have a role in trying to manage this issue. And outlawing the sale of certain products that are considered invasive, you still have the issue of those coming in from other states, but at least you're not having a supply of those regularly in the state of Indiana that could cause problems. But I think, NDOT certainly could have a role as they're doing their regular maintenance to help eradicate some of those things as well.
Okay, another question or comment. The DuBois County Soil and Water Conservation District thanks you for your continued support of our funding through the Clean Water Indiana program. DuBois County government generally supports us by funding our staff. We receive $10,000 annually from Indiana, plus grants that we compete against for other soil or water conservation districts. Indiana SWCDs are asking for a dedicated appropriation of $15.2 million to be split between the 92 soil and water conservation districts, the competitive grant program, and our support staff with the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. Without a source of clean water, we as human beings could not survive. Obviously, water is very important to us all. So the question from Judy, my question is, when the legislators work on the budget, how are the funds divided up? How do or who decides how much funding each line item receives? And how do we raise awareness of our value to the state of Indiana?
Okay, I am not on the Appropriations Committee. I'm on the Tax and Fiscal Committee, so I don't know how all of the processes behind the scenes work, but I can tell you a few things off the top that, and you may know more from the Ways and Means side of the House, but you're shaking your head like you're not on Ways and Means, so we don't know how the sausage is made, right? Okay, great. All right, great. So we know from the start that we have certain fixed costs that the state has to fund. So we pay each school an amount per student. And so those kinds of costs are always accounted for first. What are the fixed costs? And then from that, then we look at budget forecasts, how much money we expect is going to be coming in, what did the past budget forecasts look like, and did we meet that forecast, or are we behind in our funding? And that is checked several times throughout the year. In terms of what is determined to be those line item amounts, that's determined upon what the fixed costs that the state of Indiana will have to fund, and what those budget forecasts look like in terms of how much income is going to be coming in. But we also do set aside some reserves called the Rainy Day Fund, which will fund the government for, what is it, up to 40 days? Yeah, so we have enough in reserves to keep the government open for 42 days in the event of a catastrophic event. So that's probably the best answer I can offer without knowing and not being part of those decisions.
Well, I mean, in reality, if we go into Senator Mishler or Senator Kenley in the past, and there's an issue like this, all of these expenditures will be line items that and whether the Department of Agriculture or each agency goes into the budget, into the governor and says, here's our pitch, here's what we want, and you start with all of the expenses, then we as she stated, we start with things we know we got to fund, and then this past year it looks like we're going to have about $178 million surplus from what we projected coming in to what actually came in, so there'll be a little more money to work with that we can roll into this budget. Some of the agencies didn't spend, all of their allotted dollars from last year, so there's a process that the governor, as you get toward the end of the budget session, he'll say, he'll have, any unused funds within an agency reverted back to the, to the budget process, and those reversions become part of what we can, fund things with. And I think the past biennium, there was about $300 million in reversions from different departments. And some of the things he's proposed in his budget, I think there was some of the money, to pay down the pension liability, and part of what he had proposed for extra money for teachers is coming from reversions. There was another project he was wanting to pay for, out of reversions, and then you've got your forecast, but all of these requests go into the Excel file, they go into the matrix, and you look at all the requests for more money, and there's a lot of them, and what do you have to fund, and what do you want to fund, and come about April 10th, April 12th, when we get our last revenue forecast, if the revenue forecast is up, then all of those things that you want to do, you slot in as many of them as you can, or as much of as many of them as you can. If the revenue forecast goes down, they all go away. And then you start to try to defend what, the ratios on the things you have to fund. We have to fund schools, we have to fund, DCS has a big ask. I mean, there's public I mean, there's tons of things that we feel like we have to fund, and there's a list of things we want to try to do, and all of that. At the last few days of budget conference committee work, it's going through the House will have their list of, and usually there's something to be divvied up at the end, not always. They've got their list of priorities, we got our list of priorities, and the governor's got his list, and you sit down and it's a lot of push and shove and barter and trade and wiggle, and it's nothing pretty about it, but I mean, that's how at the last few days of conference committee time with the budget folks, and then you look at all the bills that we want to pass, and some of them will require, more money for an agency, and some of those bills hang until that last, end of the day of budget session. So something's going to take more caseworkers, if something's going to take more, IDM inspectors, if something's going to take more, alcohol, tobacco, and everything that's going to take more people and more money, those bills fall into that same, last few days, and you figure out what you can afford to do, and within those you try to prioritize them, and you try to, maybe if they ask us 15.2 million, maybe you end up with another 5 or 10. So at the end of the day, do you want to try to do more? Absolutely. 10,000 per county is, not much. So a bigger ask, and then there's some grants, and but do we want to try to prioritize that? Yeah, because what I've seen in Du Bois County, from the soil and water conservation programs, and when I drive and I see cover crops, and I drive down the country and I see erosion ditch control mats put in place, those things all do help protect erosion, help protect water quality, and are good projects that our folks here get it. Our soil conservation district has been amazingly successful. I wish every county could say they've done, what we've done here. But a lot of it comes down to what can you afford, to fund, to get out and work with farmers and landowners and try to incentivize and step in and do But so it's a complicated process on those budgets. That'll be on the list. It'll be one of the things really till we get our last revenue forecast. If it's up, life is easier. If it's down, then it gets hard.
All right. Can the state of Indiana have a government shutdown?
Well, if we would not pass a budget this year, by June 30th, on July 1st, if we did not approve a budget, then all state agencies would have to stop operation. Now, we've never not, I don't know if in our history, if we've never not gotten a budget passed. I think we've always gotten one. We had a special session my first year in 2009 because we didn't get a budget passed in April. We came back in June, and I think there's a required special session many times to get a budget adopted. But if we wouldn't get a budget adopted, our state agencies would have to close the doors on July 1. But that's theoretically it could. It's never happened, but it's possible.
All right, and this is from Carla Striegel-Winter, and she was with the Du Bois County Solid Waste Management District. Carla would like to thank Senator Messmer for his past support of these solid waste management districts and ask about Senate Bill 375 and Senate Bill 314, both regarding limiting funding options for the soil and solid waste management districts. I'm getting yours and Judy's mixed up. Can the solid waste management districts depend on Senator Messmer to be non-supportive of these types of bills?
I'll have to look those up, but if they're in my committee and they would restrict funding to solid waste districts, they won't get a hearing. There's one county that just seems to be the poster child for all of these problems. Anybody want to guess which county? You've probably heard it in this room before. Lake County is always the poster child.
It's Niemeyer to your committee.
Okay, if it would, I've helped kill several attempts, at this over the past, 4 years in the Senate for sure. I was hoping when Senator Gard retired, that would be the end of the attempt to shut them down. But no bills will get a hearing that impact, solid waste districts' ability to, to fund their programs.
All right. With regard to House Bill 1256, same-day registration, this bill would appear to be an open window for potential voter fraud and voting by ineligible voters. The voter would not have to do anything other than sign a registration and affirmation and may not be eligible. So there's another question about another bill, but comment on House Bill 1256 on same-day registration.
So I'm just looking up I've not heard of House Bill 1256 as of yet. So my guess is, I'm looking at it here, I'm trying to see, did you see which committee it's?
I would doubt that would get a hearing.
That's where I would say.
I would consider that a pretty aggressive, voter integrity, challenge to try to deal with. If you're looking for ways to increase, voter participation, I think what we've done in Du Bois County with early voting sites, more access to early voting, more locations for early voting. If people don't want to show up to vote, we make it as easy as possible. This past election in 2018, more people voted early than voted on election day in Du Bois County. And I think we probably had one of the highest numbers in the state on early voting participation. That's how you get more people to vote. Number one, they have to care about what's going on, on the ballot. But making it, more accessible. We've gone to early voting sites all across the county, for the 30-day period before the election. We try to make accessibility to get there as easy as we can, and I think we've done, very well in our county. Same day on-site registration and voting would just, I don't know how you would manage that and not keep, somebody from coming in from out of state and registering that day. Voter integrity would be really, and validating where they live, would be hard to manage with that.
And then, you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just say, like we started, I think 600 and some bills on their side, 700 and some on our side. So as you just saw, I never even heard of that bill. I had no idea what that bill was. So, and that's the case for the majority of the bills. So I just encourage you, if there's something you see, feel free to, I know that these two would be happy to dig into that. I'd certainly be happy to dig into that. And I have constituents do that pretty regularly. Hey, what's going on with this bill? I have no idea what's going on with that bill because I haven't been made aware of that bill. So please feel free to, if this has been a concern for the last week or 2 weeks or since you've seen it, let us know and we can dig into that and get those answers for you, because the majority of the bills won't see the light of day, much less get any real serious consideration. So, and I think that's probably going to be the case with this bill as well. Again, I just say to feel free to reach out to us if there are bills like that, and we can certainly get some answers for you, prior to waiting to come to a situation like this. So,
is there a website you can go to follow the status of a bill? And what would that be?
It's iga.in.gov. And you can search by legislator, you can search by bill number. You can see the list of bills that have been filed and go down through there and see all the subject matter. So if you go to that site, you could search by Senator Messmer or mine.
And say that again in case someone was wanting to write that down.
IGA, Indiana General Assembly, iga.in.gov.
Okay, thank you. And then here's another question. Go on.
And on that, when you click the bill number, the bills are going to be in like bright blue, and when you click it, you can go over to the left side of it, and the thing to really monitor what's happening with the bill is go down to the tab that says Bill Actions, and if you click it, because sometimes I get calls in the second half of session, asking about a House bill, or even a Senate bill. If you click that, it'll tell you assigned to such and such committee. And if you see that it's been assigned to committee, but you don't see, scheduled for, it'll say scheduled for hearing and the date, voted out of committee and a date, voted off the floor and a date. And it'll have it'll have the bill actions. It'll tell you what's happened, or if people get added to the bill as authors, it'll list anything that happens with that bill. And then, so you can monitor if a bill's just been assigned to committee and as the days and weeks go on and you don't see anything else happening to it, it's got one author, it's been assigned to committee, that's a pretty good indication it ain't going anywhere. But then you can also slide down that tab and you can see Senate roll calls, House roll calls, and you can click that, and then you can pull up and you can see how every person voted. Whether it was on a committee, there's roll calls for the committee vote, and there's roll calls for the vote on the floor. And it's very informative. I mean, it's really pretty easy to use. And even if you can't even remember the website, just type in Indiana General Assembly on Google, and it'll take you right to that same page.
And one other thing I'll note is that the third reading deadline for the House and Senate is February 26th. So any Senate bill that does not move out of the session by February 26th is dead. Any bill that does not move out of the House by February 26th is dead. So after February 26th, then the Senate will start considering House bills and the House will start considering Senate bills. And then we'll have until the end of session to consider what we're going to pass through at that point. But if you do look at the website and find that there's been a bill that's assigned to a committee and it's after February 26th and it's a Senate bill on the Senate side, then that bill is dead.
That's all very helpful. And then this question refers to House Bill 1184. I'm just reading this. It says, this bill looks like it could have the effect of promoting suicide. It also puts a burden on insurers with suicide clauses. House Bill 1184.
So, yeah, this bill, I think, I actually sit on Vice Chair of Public Health. It's been assigned to Public Health. This is a bill I did just read through this last week. Just where I'm, you know, my stance on it is I'm not a fan of that of that type of bill. I would agree with that. You know, I feel very strongly that you know, that life is sacred, and I think that that's something that we need to be very careful of opening the door to. So this is another one. I think it's kind of ditto to what we just said regarding the last bill. I don't think this bill is going to get a hearing, and it's as we said, it's been referred to our committee, and we haven't decided to hear it as of yet. So.
Yeah, there's a Senate bill that would set up the similar process, and you know, assisted suicide bills or euthanasia bills or. You know, we have a complete segment of our society dedicated to suicide prevention, whether it's in the schools, whether it's mental health facilities. I mean, we seem like we are pushing hard to try to help people with mental health problems, whether they're students, adults. You know, I mean, there's tons of programs out there to try to help intervene for people who are dealing with depression, dealing with mental health issues, and stop suicide. You know, at all age levels. And then you have the assisted suicide crowd that says, you know, well, you know, we'd like the ability to have a doctor assist, you know, in terminating a person's, you know, end of life. And the only difference between this crowd, if you drove up and you saw somebody standing on the ledge of a bridge, you know, most anybody would say, let me help you down. Let me help you, you know, deal with your mental or physical issue that's I mean, most law enforcement people, most people.
And another question in that line, how does IDEM evaluate the quality and manufacturing standards in evaluating new processes not currently used in the USA, in particular coal to diesel? There's
a computer-generated algorithm that they spend, you know, months running through, you know, doing evaluation of you know, industrial processes. I mean, I have no idea what that computer modeling program does, but it's supposed to break it down and do forecasts on particulate matter and releases and where the, you know, based on air current patterns and where those, you know, impacts would be felt. But you really need to ask somebody at IDM about that. I mean, we have no control on that particular process.
Yeah, I would just add, you know, this question may be in reference to, you know, to the DAO plant here. And, you know, as a small business owner, I've been on kind of the other side of IDEM, and I have a certain, I'm not sure if I want to use the word faith in IDEM or not, but I guess that would be the word, in that I believe that they are doing what they can, to protect our air quality. Because again, having been a small business owner on the other side of it, I was in that position of saying, what in the world? They're making it very difficult for us to do business in some regards. So I guess when I look at this issue, I think the idea that IDEM is just letting things happen willy-nilly, I don't see that, because I've been on the other side of it, where it's been, in my opinion, at the time, punitive and cut out a chunk of our business. It didn't allow it to happen, because of the standards that were in place. So, for what that's worth, I know it's anecdotal, but that at least has helped me, make an informed decision on kind of my belief system, what IDEM is doing. I can't answer the specifics that are being asked, certainly, but I do have, direct, I've had direct associations with them, and it have not been positive for me from a business standpoint. So.
All right, we have just a couple more questions. The $2 cigarette tax increase, do you support that?
At some point in time, I'm sure there will be a cigarette tax increase. I don't see that being part of this year's budget. We know eventually the federal government's going to say our Medicaid expansion that they're covering 90% of is going to drop to 70%. We don't know when that shoe's going to drop, but we know it's coming. They cover 70% of the funding of all other Medicaid programs. They're currently covering temporarily 90% of the Medicaid expansion, but there's no guarantee of how long into the future they're going to continue to do that. We've looked at if we raise the cigarette tax now, and then we end up in a year or two, the federal government says, oh, by the way, you now have to pick up, not 10% of that cost, but 30% of that cost. We've looked at, the cigarette tax, is, probably going to be our vehicle, to fund that. If we raise them now and get that cigarette tax money into the budget process, I can guarantee you that money is going to be dedicated to things that nobody's going to want to give up in a year or two or three. And when we need that revenue source, we'd have to just raise taxes, overall, or cut $400 to $500 million out of something else, and nobody really wants to face that type of fiscal challenge.
And that was part of the other question, is that it would support the Medicaid program.
It would be 100%. That's really what we're waiting for. That, and the people in the tobacco industry know it's coming. It's just going to be, when do we have the Medicaid, financial hit coming, and what are we going to pay for it with, and that's the most logical place to wait to move that that process at that time.
All right, another question is Senate Bill 94 has passed out of committee and will be before the Senate. This bill essentially restricts cities and towns from any sort of annexation except for voluntary, and voids legally established annexation waivers. AIM has worked with the legislation on this issue in the past, and we will see the bill as a solution in search of a problem. I would urge the senators to vote no on Senate Bill 94 and allow the cities and towns that are the economic drivers in our state to continue to grow in a systematic and orderly way that current state law provides. And that's from Denny Spinner. He's the mayor of Huntingburg, and he's also the president of AIM, which is the Association of Indiana Municipalities.
I have not seen the bill, Mayor Spinner, but I will take a look at it and appreciate your input.
Okay, one last question. Does federal law trump Indiana law? So we'll have a little humor at the end. So.
Yes.
All right, I think that worked out really well, writing those questions down and kind of made them a little bit more concise instead of going. So anyway, I'd like to again thank our legislators for being here today. I want to thank all of you for being here. It's been a really nice kind of dialogue this morning. And also wanted to remind everyone that we have a ribbon cutting today at the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame at 1 o'clock, which is on the campus over by the bistro. So thanks again for being here and have a great day.